Hello, everyone, and welcome to the African Tech Authors and Speakers Forum. I'm very, very excited today to have Adrian Hinchcliffe on the show. He is the group editor at ITWeb. Now, if you read the ITWeb website and the newsletters, if you read the Brainstorm magazine, if you watch the ITWeb videos on YouTube, it's this man's job, I guess, ultimately, Adrian. But the aim of today is, how do we get our young people to be better writers? How do they approach a publication like ITWeb and others? But I want to kick off by welcoming you and maybe just spend a few moments by telling us a bit more about yourself and the work that you're doing, Adrian.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for having me, Johan. So the work I do is varied. I suppose that's what keeps it interesting, is no day is the same. As you mentioned, we have our online news service. We've got an Africa-focused news service. We've got Brainstorm, which is the print magazine, predominantly print. And then we've got the ITWeb TV, which is our video. And then ITWeb also has an events division. So yeah, there's many fingers in many pies. It's all really about kind of keeping the ICT community informed and kind of up to date with what's happening. And there's a whole variety of different forms of content that we deal with. And as you kind of kindly said, it's my responsibility. I kind of oversee a team of people who are very good at what they do. So it's their responsibility to really kind of make all that happen. And I just probably am the annoying one that pokes fingers in and just pulls things out from when they shouldn't be pulled out. So I try and have an influence, but kind of let them do what they need to do as much as they can.
And it's just, I think, from an African and South African point of view, probably the best source of news, of thought leadership. So I'll put the links in the video. It's worth following if listeners are not yet. What the hell are you doing? You have to follow these guys, these people, these authors. Adrian, how did you get into writing and technology writing? Is it something one is born with? Is it something one learns over time? Tell us a bit about your journey, and also, what are some of the things that you wish you knew 20 or 30 years ago that you know now?
I wish I knew how to do my own tax returns, because that would save me a little bit. I think my journey, so I am not your typical kind of journalist. My degree was in public relations. So for many in the journalism world, that's kind of seen as the dark side. The commercial kind of side of things, of selling in stories and getting journalists to write about things. So I studied that. And then, having done a year in industry, I realized that I didn't really enjoy it that much. What I did enjoy was the writing side, the content side. And after graduation, I got a job in London working for a B2B publishing company, so business publishing company. And we were focused on the mobile telecoms industry then. Much like ITWeb today, this company was doing email newsletters back in the very early days of the internet, and was doing kind of management reports. And we also did print publications. They went on to do events. So you can see I've not strayed too far from my initial foundations. So I started really, I guess I did a lot of writing in my degree, and that was more academic writing. I think when you come into a journalist side of world, I mean, there's different types of content, and maybe we can kind of get onto those shortly. You kind of learn to put together articles. A lot of it was news articles, so they're very kind of short and factual. There were also some features, so they're a bit longer and a bit more informed. You get more time to write them typically, and they're a bit more thought-provoking, perhaps. So you want to kind of either challenge people's perceptions or kind of really get them thinking about things, give them more insight than you would do in a news piece. So that was kind of my background. I was doing the newsletters there for a few years, and then moved on to their management reports, which was more in depth. We would take a topic. So I mean, my favorite report that we did there was Apple in mobile, before they launched the iPhone. and we did that sort of a year before Apple actually came out and launched the iPhone. So we'd kind of looked at what was going on around the industry, who some of the players would be that they would kind of rely on to make the phones, what their value proposition could be, and just some of the signals that were there. And those were kind of big, sort of 30 to 50 to 100 page reports. So really, I've kind of covered that from the short news bits through to these kind of long reports. And then when I came to South Africa, which would be 15, 16, 17 years ago now, I was very lucky to kind of fall into the path of ITWeb and realized that they kind of did what I did, but they were focused on the IT industry in South Africa. What I started doing here was custom publishing. So that's very much client-driven content. We would do client-driven supplements to the Brainstorm magazine, marketing material. So I've kind of cut my teeth there, and then we did a channel focus, so the ICT supply chain. We did a magazine for them, and we've done various directories for the kind of IT decision makers in the South African IT industry. So we've got a lot of different things that we've done, and then I kind of eventually took over Brainstorm, did that for about 3 years, and then I've taken over the group editorship. So I've covered a lot of different things, and I suppose, how did I fall into writing? I think it was just, I wasn't great at writing at school. I've got a son who's in his early teens, and we have to get a tutor in for his Zulu, because obviously it's not our home language. So we need that kind of extra support. And I remember that at the time I had to have extra support for my English when I was at school. And there's probably some editors and possibly some readers who will recognize that my writing isn't my greatest strength still today. But I think, it's a good kind of background in English language helps. But I mean, if you enjoy reading, that also helps. If you have a passion for a subject, that's great. And being able to express that. I mean, I think there's a lot of perhaps more academic or kind of technical thinking about how writers should be. And there's a lot of holier than thou type thinking about journalism. And I think that's right, that we are this kind of ethical profession. And, the likes of the Daily Maverick and News 24 and Amma Bungani will go out and do those investigative reports. And that's not quite where ITWeb is. We're not always kind of breaking that sort of new stuff. We have got a strong ethical kind of leaning as an organization. But it's about having a passion. It's about telling a story. And I think that's perhaps what we sometimes overlook in journalism is we go out and hunt the truth, and that's great for news, but it's also about giving that story in a way that people actually want to consume it. It's about kind of drawing people in and informing them ultimately.
You're so right, Adrian, because I've over the years read a lot from various people, and you can see they're very good at using English language, metaphors and the like, but you want to fall asleep. So how do you grip that reader from paragraph one? How do you tell a story and then conclude it in the conclusion? And I also think people's attention spans are so much shorter these days. I don't know, depending on the publication, whether more than 600 words, which is about 4 or 5 minutes of reading, does well, depending on it. But I mean, you've sharpened your teeth in the pre-chat GPT world, where we actually have to probably, and it's probably not that long ago, but maybe it was typewriters or some sort of word processor. It is so much easier these days. I wonder if it's not easier to lose our authentic voice because we can chat GPT or Gemini a lot of things. Was it Hemingway that said, writing is easy, sit in front of the typewriter and cut your vein open and bleed, or something like that? So, and I think that's where a lot of our audience and potential writers struggle. I've got this knowledge. I'm an expert in my field. I believe I can help others. But that blank page looking at you, I don't know if that ever goes away, that daunting thing of, and also procrastinating. And, so for me, when I need to write, I suddenly start doing the dishes, the washing. I've got all these little tasks at home. Is that also something that you struggle with? And will that ever go away, do you think?
Yeah, look, I'm not. So I think perhaps to go back a step. So I'm an editor, and that role differs slightly from a writer. I certainly still write, but my job is then to look at other people's copy. And there's a couple of different types of editors you've got perhaps editors that are more focused on the content, and then you've got the more kind of technical editors, what we call the sub editors, who look at the grammar, the flow, the way the article kind of sits together, look for the factual accuracy. And I'm thankful in a way that I'm not old enough to have worked on a typewriter. But yeah, I mean, that's the old news world would have had sub editors. Journalists would file copy, it would be a bit rough around the edges, and then they would send it to the sub editor who would look through it, clean it up, send it back if they had questions of like, is this right? Have you got sources for this? And now I guess the editors kind of got to play a bit of a role of both. They've got to be able to check content and make sure. Like at ITWeb, we do still have sub editors. We're kind of very lucky in that sense. Maybe I want to get onto the AI discussion in a bit because I mean that's definitely something that kind of affects us. But I think the sub editor role is something, yeah, it's one that we often overlook, but it's definitely a part of what needs to happen in publications. You need to kind of make sure that the story flows. Then your content, as you mentioned, it's important to have a passion to be able to kind of, as an editor. Sorry, I'm going off your question originally, but as an editor, you have to kind of, you're almost the curator of content. So then for the writer, to go back to your point, yeah, so I do write a bit, and because I've spent more time as an editor recently, I do struggle with writing. I've got in our teams we've got journalists, and they'll be producing 2-3 stories a day. And if you asked me to do that, I would be here from 1 minute past 12 at midnight and finishing at 1 minute to 12, and I might have only done 2 stories. Like it takes me a long time to write that, and I think part of that is the way that my brain works. I'm the way that I write, but I do kind of get that fear. I think it is quite common, and if you're not a regular writer, and I mean, it happens for some people. I'm sure some people will just sit down and bash it out, and like they're able to kind of put it together very quickly. I think the way that we structure articles before they go to publishing is we have to put in a headline, we have to put in the byline, and then we have to put in what we call the blurb, the short description, and then we start the article. And it sounds quite arrogant, but the first words that I like to put on a page is my own name, because that's the only thing that I actually know that's going to go down that I can get right. But then, yeah, you'll sit there and you'll kind of think, and it is that writer's block. You do struggle, and sometimes it's easier there's different ways of doing it. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, and what I should have done is the advice I should give you, which is there's ways that you can sit and you plan an article, and you kind of go through the bullet points and you go through the topics, and then you kind of structure it, and then you kind of write according to that skeleton. And that's perhaps, if you're new to writing, that's a very solid way of doing it. You know what the main points you want to cover, and then you kind of fill out those areas. For someone like myself, I'm a bit more disorganized, and I'll go into an interview and then kind of take it. I'll go and research and have a structure of there, but I don't necessarily follow that structure in the interview. So then when I come to write it, I've got to try and pick it back together and patch it together. And I quite enjoy that. I don't know if that's a kind of twisted part of my psyche, but like I enjoy going through and go, okay, well, that bit fits here and this bit fits here. And where does that bit? Okay, so then you've got to kind of piece it all together. And obviously, if you're talking to more than one interviewee, then makes it that little bit harder, especially if they've kind of talked about different things that are related, and how do you patch them in and where to introduce them. I mean, looking at content that some writers produce, they'll do it very much that the first voice that they'll hear is Johan. So I'm going to listen to Johan talk about AI. He's going to give us the general introduction. Then the next person is going to be, I don't know, Paul. And Paul's going to talk about AI in the financial services sector. And then we'll kind of finish off. So piecing it together like in a logical structure using different voices. But like I say, someone like myself will just kind of throw it all together and hope that I can pull together some kind of coherent flow through it. And I think that's probably why it does take me so long to write. But I think you'll know yourself from writing, it's important to try and just get words down. And I think you can sit there for an hour, 2 hours a day, even struggling on that first paragraph because you really want to draw people in. Like you said earlier, you want that attention span. You really, not so much in news, but in more features writing, you want to kind of draw people in. You want to tell a story. You want to catch them. What's going to make this a bit more interesting? Is it going to be a personal anecdote? Is it going to be about, I don't know, Elon Musk for the sake of like a newsmaker people are interested in? Maybe they're not interested in, and maybe they've lost interest by now. But something that kind of hooks people, that draws their attention, and then you've got to kind of start building that flow. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Look, just to latch on to some of the things you've said, Adrian, I think there are a lot of, call it, tricks of the trade, but you have to find your own way of working. What time of day do you write better? Maybe the mornings or the evenings, and how long does it take? And how do you deal with procrastination, which is a big challenge for me? But learn from others, but find your own way of doing it. And the other thing is, I read somewhere they call it puking on paper, that first draft. Because a lot of people, and I think especially those in technology, we want to be so critical and so perfect that we never get done. What helps me, for instance, is I will do a voice transcription. I will just blurb stuff out and let the AI write it for me. Later on, I'll find a kind of a structure to it. What helps me also is I write on my notepad and I make my font white, which means I can't see all the edits of all the grammar mistakes and the like, because I'm too tempted to edit it all the time. We've only got a few minutes left, Adrian, and I do think we need to chat again. But what I do want to ask you is, if young aspiring writers in this space want to approach a publication like an ITWeb or a Brainstorm, and if they're not really known yet, what do they do? What are the typical mistakes to avoid? And how's best to approach an editor, or who do they even approach the editor or somebody else in the organization?
Yeah, so I think typically, I mean, I'm going to talk from ITWeb's point of view. I'm sure a lot of other publishers out there have got similar. You can either make contact with the journalist directly, the editor, that you'll maybe find them on LinkedIn. You'll maybe find their contact details on the site for the organization. Or you've just got like a general switchboard or a general kind of contact detail. So yeah, I think as an industry, the tech industry we struggle, if I'm honest. We've got a pool of writers who are experienced, who kind of have been doing this for 10, 20 years, who know the tech industry, who can do this with their eyes shut. But we have a lack of voices. And I think that's something that as ITWeb, we're consciously looking for. Also within Brainstorm, one of the print publication, we're definitely kind of keen for more voices there. So yeah, how do you get about contacting us? By all means, like, find our details, get through to us. I think some advice I would give is try and understand who the audience for the publication is. Like, what do they want to know? What sort of writing? What sort of topics? Have a look at the articles, if you can, that they're producing already on that site or that publication. What's their tone? Is it very kind of factual? Is it very newsy? Or is it a bit more kind of personality driven, where we start with the anecdotes, or I met this guy and he told me about this? There's whole scope. And I think that's part of something that comes on that writing journey, is you'll learn your own voice. But also you need to kind of fit in with what the publication needs as well. So yeah, I mean, news typically is very factual. It's very kind of matter of fact, to the point. Whereas, as I say, features are more kind of personality driven. I think advice I would give is try not to be too clever. I think that some people, I mean, we see it with politicians and people that work in government often, that they'll kind of use language because they use it with their colleagues, and maybe you use it with your colleagues in a tech environment. And that doesn't necessarily translate that people understand on the page. When they're reading it, they might not know that terminology. They might not know those kind of the jargon that you're using, or the kind of the chat that you would do something in a more informal way. And I think that's maybe something else to consider, is that it is a bit more of a formal approach than writing an email to you or me. And yeah, just think of it that you're writing to not a massive audience, but to an audience of business readers. So it could be someone who's 18, who's just kind of starting out in the technology industry, or it could be a CEO who's just about to retire and has lived the tech industry and kind of shaped the tech industry. So you really need to appeal to that whole broad audience. I think it needs to be coherent. Like I mentioned about the structure, you need to kind of plan what you want to say. You need to articulate it well. As I say, we've got sub-editors here. I don't know about some of the other publications, if they still use sub-editors. So that perfectionism that you talked about, definitely I suffer from that too. Like I want to make it so that when it goes to our sub-editors, they don't really have much to do. They don't ask me any questions, not because, of my position, but just I want them to sit through it and read it and go, oh, you missed a comma here. The rest is fine. But I think it's difficult to kind of know, and perhaps that's the question you need to ask the editor or your contact at the publication, is how much leniency is there? Do you want something that's neat and polished and final, or can I give you something raw, and would you be open to giving me advice? It would be lovely in a world where we would say, yeah, sure, we'll give you the advice, we'll take you under our wing. But also the media is we're competing with AI for content. If I'm honest, we're competing with local competitors, we're competing with international. So we're all kind of quite thinly stretched. So certainly we will try and give you the advice. Certainly we'll kind of point you in the right directions if we can. But bear in mind that the journalists, the editors are usually quite thinly stretched themselves. I mentioned the logical structure earlier. I think something, and again, maybe the news piece, news is, as I say, it's about getting the most important facts. The 5 W's is really there in the opening paragraph. That's the who, the why, the what, the where, the when, the how. But with a more features-driven piece, it's a bit more it's got more of a flow. You have a beginning, like I say, the hook. And what's nice, and I think they call it a callback in the stand-up comedy industry, is where you get to the end and you reference something that kind of you hinted at or talked about in the beginning. So that's kind of got that whole holistic feel about it, that you go on this journey and you kind of come back to where you started out from, and it all makes sense. It's that whole presentation thing of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. I don't know whether people still stick to that. My dad used to swear like that, but my dad didn't do as many presentations, I don't think, as you would have done. But that's definitely what I would say. And like I say, there's definitely a hunger for new young talent to come into the industry. ITWeb, particularly Brainstorm, is keen for new young writers. I think if you've got a passion, if you've got an interest, if you've got experience and knowledge in a tech area, then that, if you can put that down on paper, send it through. Bear in mind the word counts. It's, as you mentioned, 600 words. 600 words for something like Brainstorm is 1 page. The most we'll do is 4 pages, and that's like our cover story. And even then, we want to break it up with like what we call a sidebar or a box. 4 pages of content in the modern day and age is quite hard to get people to read through that many words. And there you're looking at maybe 2,000, 2.5 at the most. So you can sit and you can churn that writing it like content out, and that's great. But then the hardest part for a journalist is perhaps to be critical and to then cut it down and know, okay, I need to provide 600 words. I've done 1,200. So where can I cut? And that's sometimes where the editor or the sub-editor can give you a bit of advice. Send it to them, say, look, I know I need to provide 600. I've done 1,200. What would be your thing? By all means, look at it, study it yourself. Don't send it your first 1,200. Take the time to kind of reflect on it, go away for the day, come back the next day. I often find that helps, is I've written something and the next morning I'll give it a read with fresh eyes, because then you can be a bit more critical. You've refreshed your brain.
Sure. A lot of good advice there, Adrian. Yeah, just watching time here, but I do think we
Sure.
need to chat again because we need to get to the AI stuff, also more of the writing process, perhaps. But you've given a lot of golden nuggets here that will help our audience, Adrian. Um, Looking forward to chatting again. Thank you for your time. Adrian Hinchcliffe, the group editor at ITWeb. Go read ITWeb's newsletters. Sign up to Brainstorm. Look at the videos on YouTube. It's going to help you as a tech professional in particular so much. So, Adrian, great pleasure. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thanks, Johan. Thanks for everything you're doing as well, for helping us kind of reach that new young audience as well. ITWeb, without giving a plug, we are kind of keen to get the community together. So if we can get more people writing and delivering to each other, thank you.
Adrian, thank you.